He bought a cursed Mafia mansion for just $1. But what his dog uncovered inside would put a $50 million secret and his life on the line. No one in Black Ridge Valley could understand why Ethan Cole would choose that place. A broken veteran, a haunted house, and a past he couldn't escape. But the moment his dog Shadow started digging, everything changed. What they found wasn't just money. It was something far deeper, something dangerous, and something that would test how far loyalty can really go. Before we begin, comment below and tell me, where are you watching this from? The road into Black Ridge Valley curved like a scar through the mountains, cutting between tall pines that whispered in the wind. By the time Ethan Cole's truck climbed the last stretch of gravel, the sky had already begun to dim, painted in cold shades of gray and fading gold. The town sat quiet below, small and distant, as if it had decided long ago to stay away from whatever waited up here. Ethan didn't look back. In the passenger seat, Shadow lifted his head, ears twitching as the tires crunched over loose stones. The German Shepherd's dark eyes scanned the tree line, alert and steady, always watching. He had that same look overseas, the one that had kept them both alive. "You feel it too, huh?" Ethan muttered, his voice low, rough from disuse. Shadow didn't answer, of course. He never needed to. The mansion appeared slowly, like something rising out of the earth rather than built upon it. At first, it was just a shape through the trees. Then the iron gates came into view, twisted, rusted, one side hanging slightly off its hinge. Beyond them stood the house itself, and it was bigger than Ethan remembered from the listing, too big for one man. The structure stretched wide and tall, its stone walls darkened by years of neglect. Ivy had crawled up its sides like veins, choking windows that stared out blank and lifeless. The roof sagged in places. One of the upper windows was shattered, its jagged edges catching the last light of day like broken teeth. Shadow let out a low, quiet growl. Ethan killed the engine. Silence settled in for a moment. Neither of them moved. It was the kind of silence that didn't feel empty, but full, heavy, watching. "Home sweet home," Ethan said finally, though there was no humor in it. Earlier that day, the entire town had watched him sign the papers. They hadn't tried to hide their laughter. The clerk at the county office had leaned back in his chair, shaking his head as he stamped the final document. "You know what you're buying, right?" he'd said, not bothering to keep his voice down. "That place ain't been lived in for decades. Folks say it's cursed." Someone in the back had chuckled. "Cursed? Hell, it's worse than that. That's Vieri's place," another voice followed. "Yeah, people disappeared up there. My uncle swore he heard things at night. Screams maybe, or something like it." Ethan hadn't reacted. He'd just signed his name. $1. That's all it took. $1, and a man who had nothing left to lose. Now standing in front of the mansion, the laughter still echoed faintly in his mind. Not as loud as the other sounds he carried, but enough. A flash, sand, heat, the sharp crack of something tearing the air apart. Ethan blinked hard. The mountains came back into focus. Shadow nudged his hand gently, grounding him. "I'm good," Ethan whispered, though his breath had tightened without him realizing it. He opened the truck door and stepped out. The cold air hit him immediately, sharp and clean, carrying the scent of pine and something older beneath it. Damp stone, rotting wood, and time. Shadow jumped down beside him, landing silently. Already scanning the surroundings, they approached the gate together. Ethan pushed it open with a firm shove. It groaned in protest, metal grinding against metal, the sound echoing out into the valley like a warning. No one answered. No one ever did up here. The driveway was cracked and overgrown, weeds pushing through the broken stone. Each step forward felt like crossing into something forgotten. The closer they got, the more details emerged. Bullet marks were etched into the walls, faint but unmistakable. Burned scars near the lower windows. A heavy front door reinforced with iron now hanging slightly, ajar. Shadow stopped. His body stiffened. Ethan noticed immediately. "What is it?" The dog's gaze fixed on the dark opening of the front door. Waiting, listening, Ethan followed his eyes. The inside of the mansion was nothing but shadow, swallowing the last light of the evening. It didn't look empty. It looked like it was holding its breath. For a brief second, something flickered at the edge of Ethan's vision. Movement, a shape shifting deeper inside. He turned his head sharply. Nothing. Just darkness. His jaw tightened. Probably just the wind, he said, though there was no wind strong enough to move shadows like that. Shadow didn't move. Ethan reached down, resting his hand against the dog's neck, but feeling the steady warmth beneath his fur. It grounded him. Brought him back from the edge of something he didn't want to fall into. "We've seen worse," he said quietly. That was true. They both knew it. But this felt different. Overseas, danger had a face, a direction, a reason here. It was something else. Ethan stepped forward. The front door creaked as he pushed it open. The sound was long and hollow, echoing through the vast interior. Dust stirred in the air, catching faint light and turning it into a slow, drifting haze. The main hall stretched out before them, massive, silent, frozen in time. A grand staircase rose along the far wall, its banister cracked, but still standing. The floor, once polished marble, was now dull and fractured. Old furniture sat covered in white sheets, shapes of forgotten lives preserved like ghosts, while the air was colder inside, colder than it should have been. Shadow stayed close, his body brushing lightly against Ethan's leg as they moved deeper into the room. Each step echoed too loud, too lonely. Ethan set his duffel bag down near the entrance, eyes scanning every corner. He'd learned long ago how to read a space, where someone could hide, where danger could come from. But this place didn't follow those rules. It felt wrong, not dangerous, not yet, just wrong. He exhaled slowly, forcing his shoulders to relax. "It's just a house," he muttered. But even as he said it, the words didn't quite land. Shadow moved ahead, sniffing the air, then paused again, this time near the far wall. His ears perked, head tilting slightly as if catching something just out of reach. "What is it, boy?" Ethan asked. No answer, just silence, but the kind that made the walls feel thicker. Ethan turned back toward the open door. Outside, the last light of day had almost disappeared. The mountains were fading into shadow, and the town below was nothing but a scattering of distant lights. Too far, too quiet, too late to turn back. He looked around the mansion once more. "They said this place eats people," he murmured. Shadow returned to his side, sitting down beside him like he always had, steady, unshaken, loyal. Ethan let out a slow breath. Good thing we're not easy to swallow. But somewhere deep inside the house, beyond the walls and the silence, something shifted. Soft, almost unnoticeable, like a door settling into place after being closed. Ethan didn't hear it. Shadow did. And for the first time since they arrived, the dog's low growl returned, quieter this time, but deeper. Not fear. Recognition, as if whatever had made that sound had noticed them too. Ethan stood still in the center of the grand hall, his breath shallow, his eyes fixed on the dark staircase ahead. The words lingered in his mind, not spoken aloud, but felt like a pressure behind his ribs. He exhaled slowly. "No," he muttered under his breath. "That's not real. It never was. Not really. Just echoes. Just memories that refused to stay buried." Shadow shifted beside him, pressing lightly against his leg again, grounding him. The dog's presence was steady, solid, real. In a way nothing else had been for a long time. Ethan reached down, his hand finding the familiar warmth of the dog's neck. "I'm here," he whispered, though he wasn't sure if he was saying it to Shadow or to himself. The house creaked, a long, slow groan from somewhere deep in its bones, like wood adjusting to the cold, or something heavier. Ethan turned his head toward the sound instinctively, and for a split second, the hall disappeared. Heat slammed into him. Sand, smoke, a deafening crack that tore the world apart. A man screaming, another voice yelling his name. "Cole, move." Ethan flinched violently, his body tensing as if bracing for impact. His hand tightened around Shadow's fur without realizing it. The mansion snapped back into place around him, cold, silent, empty. His heart was racing. Too fast, too loud. He sucked in a breath, but it didn't feel like enough air. Not again. Not here. Shadow reacted instantly. The dog turned, placing himself directly in front of Ethan, pressing his body firmly against him. A low, unsteady whine escaped his throat. Not fear, but focus, training, familiar. Ethan dropped to one knee, his hand gripping Shadow's harness. "I'm good," he said, but his voice was strained. "I'm good. Just give me a second." Shadow didn't move, didn't look away, just stayed. That's what he had always done. Back there, when everything had gone wrong, when the explosion had taken the convoy, when the dust had swallowed the sky, when the screaming had turned into silence, Shadow had found him, pinned under twisted metal, half-conscious, bleeding, alone, except he hadn't been. The dog had dug through debris, barked until someone heard, refused to leave. Ethan had woken up days later in a field hospital. The first thing he saw being those same dark eyes staring back at him, unshaken, unbroken, waiting. "You're still here," Ethan murmured now, his breathing beginning to steady. Shadow nudged his shoulder gently. Of course he was. He always would be. After a long moment, Ethan pushed himself back to his feet. The house was still quiet, still watching, but the panic had passed. For now, he moved deeper into the hall, his boots echoing softly across the cracked marble floor. Each step stirred dust into the air, faint clouds drifting in the dim light. The place smelled old. Not just abandoned, forgotten, like it had been sealed off from the rest of the world, left to rot with whatever secrets it held. Shadow stayed close, never more than a step away. Ethan picked up his duffel and carried it toward what looked like the least damaged corner of the room, a section of wall near an old fireplace, shut where the stone still held together better than the rest. "This will do," he said. He dropped the bag and unzipped it, pulling out a worn blanket, a flashlight, a small toolkit, everything he owned, reduced to a few essentials. That was enough. It had to be. He set the flashlight on the floor and clicked it on. The beam cut through the darkness, sharp and narrow, revealing more of the room in pieces rather than whole. A broken mirror leaned against the far wall. For a moment, Ethan caught his own reflection in it. He looked older than he remembered. Lines carved deeper into his face, eyes that didn't quite settle, always scanning, always expecting something. He looked away. No point staring at ghosts. Shadow suddenly stiffened again. Ethan noticed immediately. "What is it now?" The dog's ears were up, body tense, his gaze fixed toward the staircase. The same place again. Ethan followed his line of sight. Nothing. Just darkness pooling at the top of the stairs, but something about it felt off, too heavy. He grabbed the flashlight and aimed it upward. The beam stretched across the steps, climbing slowly toward the landing. For a second, it looked like something moved, a shadow shifting just beyond the edge of the light. Ethan's grip tightened. "Hello," he called out. His voice echoed, bouncing off the walls, fading into nothing. No answer. Of course not. He let out a quiet breath. Old house, wind, wood, that's all. But Shadow didn't relax, and neither did Ethan. He lowered the flashlight slightly. "All right," he said quietly. "We're not going upstairs tonight." Shadow gave a soft huff, almost like agreement. Ethan almost smiled. Instead, he turned back to the fireplace. There was old ash inside, gray and undisturbed. He knelt down, brushing some of it aside with his hand. Cold. Long dead. He sat back against the wall, pulling the blanket around his shoulders. The cold seeped in quickly, creeping through the stone and into his bones. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the broken windows. Inside, the house answered with a slow, uneasy creak. Ethan closed his eyes. For a moment, he let himself breathe. Just breathe. But even in the quiet, the memories pressed in. The explosion, the silence after the faces he couldn't forget. He swallowed hard. "You picked a hell of a place," he whispered. Shadow lay down beside him, close enough that Ethan could feel the steady rhythm of his breathing. Not alone. Not anymore. That was the only reason he was still here. The only reason he had made it this far. The house shifted again. A faint sound almost like footsteps somewhere above. Ethan's eyes opened instantly. Shadow's head lifted at the same time. They both listened. Silence. Then nothing. Ethan stared up at the ceiling. "Yeah," he said quietly. "We're not alone in here." Shadow didn't bark, didn't move, just watched. Always watching. Ethan leaned his head back against the wall, exhaustion finally catching up to him. His body was tired in a way sleep didn't fix. a deep, lingering weight that never really left. But for the first time in a long while, he wasn't running. Not from the past, not from the noise in his head. He had chosen this place, chosen to stay. Maybe it matches what's left inside me, he murmured, barely audible, broken, quiet, still standing. Outside, the wind howled through the mountains. Inside, the mansion settled around them, its walls thick with stories that hadn't yet been told. And somewhere deep within its structure, something waited, patient, unseen, as if it had been there all along, just waiting for someone like Ethan to finally come home. The night settled deep over the mountains, swallowing the last traces of light. Inside the mansion, the darkness felt thicker, less like the absence of light and more like something alive stretching into every corner. Ethan didn't sleep. Not really. He drifted in and out, never fully letting go, his body trained to wake at the smallest shift in sound. The blanket around his shoulders did little against the cold that crept through the stone walls, unsettling into his bones. Beside him, Shadow remained still, but not relaxed. Every so often, the dog's ears twitched, his head lifted, then slowly lowered again, listening. Always listening. A faint creak echoed from somewhere above. Ethan's eyes opened instantly. He didn't move at first, just listened. The sound came again, soft, deliberate. Not the random settling of an old house, not the wind. It was too measured. Step, pause, step. Ethan slowly reached for the flashlight, his fingers steady despite the tension tightening in his chest. He clicked it on, the beam cutting through the dark like a blade. The staircase stood empty. The light climbed each step, reaching the landing above. Nothing, still silent. Shadow rose to his feet. A low growl vibrated through his chest, barely audible, but unmistakable. "Oh yeah," Ethan whispered. "I hear it too." The sound stopped just like that, as if whatever had been moving had realized it was being watched. Ethan held the light steady for a long moment, then lowered it. "All right," he muttered. "We're not chasing shadows." But even as he said it, the words felt hollow because this place didn't feel like shadows. It felt aware. He leaned back against the wall again, forcing his breathing to slow. His eyes stayed open now, scanning the room, tracking every small shift of light and shadow. Time passed, minutes, maybe hours. Hard to tell. The cold deepened, the silence pressed in, and then a sudden bang. Ethan was on his feet instantly, the flashlight snapping toward the sound. The front door slammed violently against the wall, rattling in its frame. Wind strong this time, and cold air rushed in, carrying the scent of pine and something sharper beneath it. Ethan moved quickly, crossing the hall in a few strides. Shadow was already ahead of him, reaching the doorway first, scanning outside. The trees swayed under the rising wind, their branches scraping against each other with a dry, whispering sound. No one out there. Nothing moving except the forest itself. Ethan grabbed the edge of the door and pulled it shut, forcing it back into place. It resisted slightly, as if the house didn't want it closed. He pushed harder, the latch caught with a dull click. The sound echoed longer than it should have. Ethan stood there for a moment, his hand still on the door. Then he turned back. The hall looked different now. Not changed, but deeper. The shadows stretched further. We were pulling into corners that hadn't seemed so dark before. Shadow walked slowly across the room, nose low, tracking something invisible. "What do you smell?" Ethan asked quietly. The dog didn't respond. He stopped near the base of the staircase again. Same spot, same focus. Ethan stepped closer this time, raising the flashlight. The beam hit the wall beside the stairs, and for the first time, he noticed it. Faint marks, scratches, not random, not wear and tear. They were too deliberate. Long, thin lines etched into the wood paneling, overlapping in places, forming something that almost looked like tally marks. Ethan frowned. "Someone kept track of something here," he murmured. Shadow let out a low growl again. Ethan followed the line of scratches upward with the flashlight. They didn't stop at eye level. They climbed higher, all the way toward the ceiling, as if whoever made them had stood here again and again, counting or marking time. Ethan felt a slow chill crawl up his spine. "All right," he said quietly. "That's new." He stepped back slightly. The beam shifted, and for a split second, He thought he saw something at the top of the stairs. A shape, tall, still watching. Ethan's heart jumped. He snapped the light upward fully. Nothing. Just darkness. But it didn't feel empty. It felt like something had just stepped out of sight. Shadow barked once. Sharp, sudden. The sound echoed violently through the house. Then silence, thicker than before. Ethan lowered the flashlight slowly. "Yeah," he whispered. "We're definitely not alone." The words hung in the air, unanswered, but not unacknowledged, while he backed away from the staircase, never turning his back on it. His eyes stayed fixed on the landing, waiting for something, anything, to move again. Nothing did. Not this time. The house had gone still again. Too still, as if it had said enough for one night. Ethan returned to his spot near the fireplace, but he didn't sit. It didn't relax. Not anymore. Shadow stayed standing as well, positioned slightly in front of him now, guarding, always guarding. Ethan glanced once more toward the stairs. "Whatever's here," he said quietly. "It's not just old walls and wind." Shadow's ears flicked. Agreement. Ethan tightened his grip on the flashlight. "Fine," he muttered. "We'll take this one step at a time." But deep down, he knew something had already changed. This wasn't just a place to stay. As this wasn't just another empty house, this place seemed to react, to watch, to wait. And now Ethan could no longer dismiss the feeling that someone else knew they were there. The wind outside howled louder, rattling the windows. Inside, the mansion stood silent, but no longer empty. And somewhere above them, just beyond the reach of the flashlight, someone or something might still have been listening. Morning came slowly to Black Ridge Valley. A pale gray light slipped through the broken windows, soft and cold, revealing the mansion not as something supernatural, but as something worse. Real. Dust hung in the air like mist. The scratches by the staircase were still there, the silence still pressed in. Ethan stood near the doorway, staring out at the mountains as the first light crawled over the ridges. He hadn't slept, not even a little. Shadow sat beside him, alert but calmer now, his breathing steady, and his eyes scanning the tree line as if expecting something to emerge. Nothing did. The world outside looked normal, peaceful, like the house behind them didn't exist. Ethan ran a hand over his face, feeling the rough edge of stubble. His body ached, not from movement, but from tension that never fully released. "Let's get a look around," he said. Shadow stood immediately. Together, they stepped out into the morning air. The cold hit less sharply now. The sunlight, weak as it was, made everything feel manageable, almost like the night had exaggerated things. Almost. They circled the front of the mansion first. From the outside, it looked just as abandoned as expected. Broken windows, weathered stone, nothing moving, no footprints, no signs of anyone else being there. Ethan crouched briefly, scanning the ground. Clean. Too clean. The kind of clean that felt wrong. He stood again, glancing toward the tree line. "Let's go into town," he said quietly. "I want to hear what they're not saying." Shadow gave a soft huff and followed. The drive down the mountain took less time in daylight. The road looked less threatening now, though the trees still leaned in close, as if trying to hide the mansion from view. By the time they reached Black Ridge, the town had already woken up. A few trucks parked along the main street, a diner with a flickering sign, a gas station that looked like it hadn't changed in 20 years, and people watching. Ethan felt their eyes before he even stepped out of the truck. He closed the door slowly, letting it click into place. Shadow stayed close. The diner was the first stop. A bell chimed softly as Ethan pushed the door open. The smell of coffee and fried food filled the air. Simple, familiar, grounding. Conversations died almost instantly. Every head turned. Someone near the back let out a quiet laugh. "Well, I'll be damned." A man said he made it through the night. Ethan didn't react. He walked to the counter and took a seat. Shadow lay down beside him, though his eyes remained alert, tracking every movement in the room. The waitress hesitated before approaching. "You want coffee?" she asked. Ethan nodded. "Yeah." She poured it quickly, her hands moving just a little too fast. "You're the one who bought the Vieri place," she said, not really asking. "That's right." A few people exchanged looks. The man from the back leaned forward slightly. "You hear anything up there?" he asked, his tone casual, but his eyes weren't. Ethan took a sip of coffee. Old house, he said, makes noise. A few quiet chuckles, but not everyone laughed. An older man near the window didn't smile at all. He spoke without turning around. Noise ain't the problem. The room went quieter. Ethan set the cup down. What is? He asked. The man finally turned his head slightly, just enough for Ethan to see the lines on his face. People who went up there didn't always come back the same. Ethan didn't respond. Another voice cut in. You know who owned that place, right? A woman said from a nearby booth. Salvatore Vieri ran things out of there for years. Things? Ethan asked. She hesitated, then said it anyway. Things people don't talk about. The man at the back leaned forward again. People disappeared. Deals went wrong. That place. It's got a history. Ethan held his gaze steady. I've seen worse. That got a reaction. Not laughter this time. Something else. The older man by the window shook his head slowly. Maybe, he said, but not like this. Silence stretched for a moment. Then the waitress spoke again, quieter now. You should leave, she said, before it starts noticing you. Ethan's jaw tightened slightly. Too late for that. Shadow shifted at his feet, sensing the change. Ethan stood up, placing a few bills on the counter. That's enough stories for one morning, he said. He turned and walked out without waiting for a reply. The bell above the door chimed again as it closed behind him. Outside, the air felt colder than before. The sunlight didn't reach as far. Ethan headed back toward the truck with Shadow at his side, but as he reached the door, he stopped. Something felt off. He looked up slowly. Across the street, near the edge of town, a black SUV sat parked, engine off, windows tinted. No movement, but it hadn't been there when they arrived. Ethan's eyes narrowed slightly. Shadow's ears perked up. The dog let out a low, quiet growl. Yeah, Ethan murmured. I see it. For a moment, neither of them moved. Then, just as quietly, the engine turned over. The SUV pulled away slowly, merging onto the road leading out of town, heading back toward the mountains, toward the mansion. Ethan watched it go. Something cold settled in his chest. That's not just stories, he said under his breath. Shadow stood closer now, protective, ready. Ethan opened the truck door. Let's go, he said. Yet the drive back up felt different this time. He wasn't going to a place people avoided. He was going back to something someone was watching and waiting for. The road narrowed again. The trees closed in. And as the mansion came back into view, Ethan noticed something new. The front gate. It was open, wider than before, as if someone had passed through it. Ethan slowed the truck. Shadow leaned forward, eyes locked on the house. The engine idled softly. Ethan didn't move, didn't speak, just stared. All right, he said finally, his voice low. This just got real. The wind picked up again, rustling the trees. The mansion stood ahead, silent as ever, but no longer empty and no longer theirs alone. Ethan cut the engine, but didn't step out right away. The silence outside felt different now, not quiet, but occupied, and Shadow was already tense in the passenger seat, his body leaning forward, eyes locked on the mansion. A low rumble built in his chest, barely audible but steady. Easy, Ethan said, though his own voice had tightened. He reached for the door handle, then paused, listened. Nothing. No movement. No voices. No signs of whoever had opened the gate. But that didn't mean anything anymore. Ethan stepped out slowly. The gravel crunched under his boots, too loud against the stillness. Shadow jumped down beside him immediately, staying close, alert. The open gate creaked slightly in the wind. Ethan pushed it wider with one hand as he passed through, scanning the ground. This time there were tracks, faint boot prints, fresh heading toward the house. Ethan crouched, studying them. Not his. Not from yesterday. Well, someone had been here recently. He stood up slowly. All right, he muttered. We're not imagining things. Shadow moved ahead, nose low, following the scent trail without hesitation. Stay close, Ethan said. They approached the front door, still slightly ajar. Exactly how he had left it, or how someone else had left it. Ethan placed a hand on the door and pushed it open. The hinges groaned. The sound echoed through the hall. Inside, everything looked the same, but felt different, like the air had been disturbed, like someone had walked through while they were gone and left something behind. Ethan stepped in. Shadow followed immediately, scanning, sniffing, tracking. The dog didn't hesitate. He moved with purpose, straight across the hall, past the staircase, toward the back of the house. Ethan frowned. "That's new," he said quietly. Shadow never wandered like that without reason. Never. Ethan followed. The hallway narrowed as they moved deeper into the mansion. The air grew colder, heavier, carrying a faint scent of damp wood and something metallic beneath it. They reached a back door that led outside. The hinges were rusted, but the door stood slightly open. Shadow slipped through without waiting. Ethan pushed it wider and stepped out behind him. The backyard stretched out unevenly, overgrown and wild. Tall grass swayed in the wind, brushing against broken stone paths that led nowhere. To the right, a small structure stood apart from the main house, a shed, or what used to be one. The roof sagged. One side partially collapsed. The wood darkened by years of exposure. Shadow was already heading toward it. Fast, focused. "Shadow," Ethan called, picking up his pace. The dog didn't slow down, didn't look back. By the time Ethan reached the shed, Shadow was already inside, moving with urgency. Ethan stepped in after him. The air inside was thick with dust and decay. Old tools lay scattered across the floor, rusted beyond use. Broken crates stacked along the walls. And in the far corner, Shadow was digging hard and fast. His paws tore into the dirt-covered floor with intensity, sending dust and debris into the air. Hey, Ethan said, stepping closer. "What are you doing?" Shadow didn't stop, didn't even look up. He dug deeper, claws scraping against something beneath the surface. Ethan crouched beside him. "All right," he said quietly. "You found something." He grabbed a nearby piece of wood and began clearing the dirt away alongside the dog. The ground wasn't solid. It gave slightly, and the sound beneath it was hollow. Ethan's pulse quickened. He brushed away more debris, revealing old wooden planks beneath the surface, not part of the original floor. Added later, hidden. Shadow stopped digging for a moment, stepping back just enough to let Ethan work. His ears were up, eyes locked on the spot. Ethan pried at one of the boards. It resisted at first, then shifted. A dull, hollow sound echoed beneath it. Ethan froze for a second, then slowly pulled the plank free. Darkness stared back up at him, a space beneath the floor. Not deep, but enough. Ethan leaned closer, raising his flashlight and shining it inside. Dust, wood, and something else. A wall, stone, but it didn't match the rest of the structure. Too smooth, too clean. Ethan's brow furrowed. "This wasn't part of the original build," he murmured. Shadow let out a low growl again. Ethan widened the opening, pulling away more of the planks. The space beneath revealed more of the hidden wall, flat, solid, and unmistakably man-made. Ethan reached down, brushing his hand across it. Cold, different. He knocked on it lightly. Thud, hollow, his breath slowed. "There's something behind this," he said quietly. Shadow barked once, sharp, certain. Ethan sat back slightly, staring at the wall. The pieces were starting to fall into place. The mansion, the stories, the SUV, the footprints. Someone had been here looking for this, and now so had they. Ethan exhaled slowly. "All right," he said. "Now we know why." Shadow stepped closer, standing beside him. "Ready?" Ethan murmured. Shadow stayed beside him, always ready. Ethan glanced once more at the hidden wall, then back toward the mansion. The wind shifted outside, carrying a distant, faint sound. An engine far away, but coming closer. Ethan's head snapped up. Shadow's ears perked instantly. They both heard it. Ethan stood quickly, his expression hardening. "We're not the only ones who know about this," he said. Shadow moved to his side without hesitation. Ethan looked down at the hidden wall one last time, then toward the open yard. The sound of the engine grew louder, closer, too close. Ethan clenched his jaw. "Yeah," he muttered, "this just got worse." The wind picked up again, rattling the broken edges of the shed. The hidden wall sat beneath them, silent, but full of answers. And somewhere out on the road, someone was coming back for it. The sound of the engine rolled through the valley, low at first, then growing louder as it climbed the mountain road. Ethan didn't hesitate. "Back inside," he said sharply. Shadow was already moving. They stepped out of the shed and into the open yard. The wind carried the sound more clearly now. Tires grinding over gravel. Steady, deliberate, not lost, not searching. Whoever was coming knew exactly where they were going. Ethan scanned the tree line, calculating distance, angles, cover, old habits, ones that never left. "Move," he said. They crossed the yard quickly, slipping back through the rear entrance of the mansion. Ethan closed the door behind them gently, this time, not letting it slam. Silence returned, but it didn't last. The engine cut off outside, too close. Ethan moved to the side of the doorway, keeping out of direct sight. Shadow positioned himself just ahead, low to the ground, muscles tight. They listened. A car door opened, then another. Voices muffled, distant. Ethan couldn't make out the words. Footsteps followed, slow, measured, approaching. Shadow let out a quiet growl. "Hold," Ethan whispered. The footsteps came closer, then stopped, right outside. Ethan's grip tightened around the flashlight. The front door creaked, a slow push. It opened. The sound echoed through the hall. Ethan stayed perfectly still, his back against the wall, breathing shallow. Shadow didn't move, didn't bark, just watched. A figure stepped inside. Tall, broad, dressed in dark clothing. Another followed behind, two of them. They didn't turn on lights, didn't call out, yet they moved like they'd been here before. One of them spoke quietly. "Check the back." The other nodded. Ethan's pulse spiked. They knew not just the house, the shed, the hidden space. Shadow shifted slightly, preparing. Ethan placed a hand gently on his back. Not yet. The men split up, one heading deeper into the house, the other moving toward the rear hallway, toward the shed. Ethan's jaw tightened. If they found it, it was over. He leaned closer to Shadow. "We move when they pass," he whispered. Shadow's ears flicked. Understood. The footsteps grew closer. The man approached the doorway where Ethan stood hidden, his boots echoing softly on the marble floor. Closer, closer. Then he passed. Ethan moved instantly, silent, precise. He slipped out from the doorway. Shadow right behind him. They moved in the opposite direction, keeping to the shadows, staying out of sight. The house felt different now. No longer empty, no longer waiting. Now it was active, occupied, alive with tension. Ethan led Shadow toward the back hall, then stopped. The door to the shed still closed. But for how long? He glanced around. They couldn't stay here. Not exposed. Not with two unknowns moving through the house. Ethan's eyes shifted toward the staircase, up higher ground, better visibility. "Come on," he whispered. Shadow followed without hesitation. They moved quickly but quietly, boots barely making a sound against the worn steps. The second floor felt colder, darker. The hallway stretched long and narrow, doors lining both sides, most of them slightly open. Ethan chose one near the end. He pushed it open just enough to slip inside. Shadow entered behind him. Ethan closed the door gently. Inside, the room was smaller than the hall below, less grand, more personal. Dust covered everything, but the shape of the space remained intact. A desk sat against one wall. A bed frame stripped and bare stood near the window, and along the far side, shelves covered in old papers, books, boxes. Ethan's eyes narrowed. This wasn't just a house, he murmured. Shadow moved slowly across the room, sniffing. Ethan stepped toward the desk. The surface was thick with dust, but something had disturbed it. A faint handprint cut through the dust. Recent. Not his. Not from yesterday. Ethan's chest tightened. They were here, he whispered. Not just downstairs, up here too. He opened one of the drawers. Inside papers, old yellowed, but intact. He pulled one out, brushing dust aside. Photographs, black and white. A man stood in the center of the image, dressed sharply, surrounded by others, confident, powerful. Ethan stared at the face. Vieri, he said quietly. The man who had owned all of this, the man the town feared. But something about the photo felt off. Not the image itself, the expression. Not cold, not cruel, just tired. Ethan frowned. He set the photo aside and reached for another document, a letter handwritten. The ink faded but readable. He scanned the first line, then stopped. His expression shifted. "This isn't what they said," he murmured. Shadow looked up. Ethan read further. The words were personal, not business, not threats, not deals, something else entirely, a different side of the man. But before he could continue, a sound echoed from the hallway. Footsteps closer. Ethan froze. Shadow turned toward the door instantly. The footsteps slowed, then stopped. Right outside. Ethan held his breath. The handle shifted slightly, testing a pause. Then, the footsteps moved on. Ethan didn't move, didn't breathe. Not until the sound faded. Only then did he exhale slowly. "That was too close," he whispered. Shadow relaxed slightly, but only slightly. Still alert, still ready. Ethan looked back down at the letter in his hand. The words felt heavier now, more important. Whatever this room was, it wasn't just storage. It was a record. A story, one no one in town had told him. He glanced toward the door again, then back at the shelves. "We're not leaving yet," he said quietly. Shadow stepped closer, but Ethan folded the letter carefully, slipping it into his pocket. Then, he reached for the next box. The truth of this place wasn't in the walls, not just. It was in what had been left behind. And for the first time, Ethan felt something shift. Not fear, not tension, curiosity, a deep pull drawing him forward. Whatever this mansion was, it wasn't just something to survive. It was something to understand. And somewhere below, hidden behind wood and stone, was only the beginning. Ethan didn't move for a long moment after the footsteps faded. The silence returned, but it wasn't the same silence as before. It felt tighter now, more dangerous, like the house was holding its breath again, waiting to see what he would do next. Shadow stayed near the door, his body angled toward the hallway, guarding, and his ears flicked at every faint sound. His posture rigid but controlled. Ethan turned back to the desk. The letter in his pocket felt heavier than it should have. He pulled it out again, unfolding it carefully. The paper was worn, but intact. The ink faded yet steady, written by a hand that hadn't rushed. He read it again, slower this time. "If I could give them a different life, I would. But the world I built doesn't let me walk away." Ethan's brow tightened. This wasn't a threat. It wasn't a deal. It wasn't anything like what the town had described. He reached for the box on the desk and opened it fully. Inside were more letters, dozens, some sealed, some opened, all written in the same hand. He picked another at random. This one was shorter. "I told them I would stop. I meant it. But they don't believe me anymore. Maybe they shouldn't." Ethan exhaled slowly. He didn't say anything, but something inside him shifted. Shadow glanced back briefly, sensing the change. Ethan moved to the shelves. More documents, photos. He pulled one down. A family. A woman standing beside the same man from before, Salvatore Vieri. 2 children in front of them, smiling. Normal. Ethan stared at it longer than he expected. "That's not what they said you were," he murmured. The man in the photo didn't look like a monster. He looked like someone trying to hold on to something that was slipping away. Ethan set the photo down carefully. Another box. He opened it. Inside a journal, thicker than the rest, leather-bound, worn, used. Ethan hesitated for a second, then opened it. The first page was dated years ago. The handwriting was the same, was steady, controlled. He began to read. At some point, a man realizes the life he built is not one he can keep. Ethan's jaw tightened slightly. The words felt familiar, too familiar. He turned the page. "I thought power would protect them. I was wrong." To another page. "They see me as something I never meant to become." Ethan stopped. His eyes lingered on that line. The room around him seemed to fade slightly. Not gone, just quieter, like the words were pulling him somewhere else. a place he recognized, a place he didn't want to go back to. "I thought I could carry it all," he said under his breath, until it broke everything. Shadow moved closer, pressing gently against his leg. Ethan placed a hand on his head without looking away from the journal. "I know that feeling," he whispered. Another page read, "If I fail, let this place become something clean." Ethan's breath caught slightly. He read the line again, slower. "If I fail, let this place become something clean." Not a threat, not a warning. A wish, a final attempt at something better. Ethan closed the journal slowly. The weight of it settled into his hands. For the first time since he had arrived, the house didn't feel like it was watching him. It felt like it was waiting for something to be understood. Shadow let out a low, quiet sound. Not a growl this time, but something softer. Ethan looked down at him. "Yeah," he said. "This place isn't what they think it is." But that didn't mean it was safe. A faint sound echoed again from the lower floor. A door closing. Ethan's head snapped up. Shadow turned instantly. The danger hadn't gone anywhere, but the men were still here, still searching, still moving through the house. Ethan stepped toward the door quietly, his movements controlled, precise. He cracked it open just enough to listen. Footsteps below, faint voices. One of them sounded frustrated. "Nothing here." The other responded, "Lower. Keep looking. It's here. It has to be." Ethan's eyes narrowed. They didn't know where. Not exactly. But they knew enough. He closed the door again silently, then turned back to the room, to the journal, to the shelves. Everything here mattered. Every piece, every word. This wasn't just a hidden room. It was a message. One no one had finished reading. Ethan slipped the journal into his bag carefully, like it was something fragile, something important. He looked around the room one last time. "This place, it's not just about what's hidden," he said quietly. Shadow watched him. "It's about what was left behind." The dog's ears flicked. Ethan nodded slightly. "Come on," he said. "We're not done yet." He moved toward the door again, slower this time, more focused, less reactive. The fear from before had changed, shifted. It was still there. But now it was mixed with something else. Purpose. The house creaked softly as the wind moved outside, but it didn't feel as hostile anymore. Not like before. Because now Ethan wasn't just trying to survive it. He was starting to understand it. And somewhere deep within the mansion, beneath the floors, behind the walls, the truth waited. Not just to be found, but to be finished. Ethan eased the door open again, just enough to see into the hallway. The second floor stretched quiet and dim, dust floating in thin shafts of gray light. No movement, no sound. But below, the voices were clearer now. Closer. "We're running out of time," one of the men said, his tone sharper. The other replied low and controlled. "Then stop guessing and start thinking." He hid it for a reason. Ethan's grip tightened slightly on the door. They weren't just searching. They were hunting for something specific. Shadow moved beside him, silent as a shadow himself, his body low, eyes locked on the stairwell. Ethan leaned in, whispering just enough for the dog to hear. "We go down." "Quiet," Ethan whispered. Shadow didn't hesitate. They stepped into the hallway together. Each movement measured, each step controlled. The old floor creaked faintly beneath Ethan's weight, but the wind outside masked it, rattling the windows just enough to cover their approach. They reached the top of the stairs. Ethan crouched slightly, peering down through the railing. The two men stood in the main hall, one near the fireplace, the other closer to the back hallway, both alert, both tense. One of them turned suddenly, scanning the staircase. Ethan froze, didn't breathe. Shadow stayed perfectly still. The man stared for a long second, then shook his head slightly. "Nothing," he muttered, but his hand didn't leave the pocket of his jacket. Ethan noticed that, noted everything. The second man moved toward the rear of the house, toward the shed. Ethan's pulse spiked. He leaned closer to Shadow. If he gets out there, Shadow shifted. Ready. Ethan made a decision. Fast. Now they moved down the stairs, quick but controlled. The man near the fireplace heard it too late. He turned. Ethan stepped out from the shadow, Don't, he said, his voice low and steady. The man froze, eyes flicking between Ethan and the dog. Shadow stood just ahead, body rigid, gaze locked, a deep growl building in his chest. The second man reappeared from the hallway, stopping short when he saw them. Silence settled between them, heavy and tense. "You're in the wrong house," Ethan said. The first man let out a short breath. "No," he said quietly. "You are." Ethan didn't react. "Turn around," he continued. "Walk out the way you came in." The second man took a step forward. Shadow's growl deepened instantly. A clear warning. The man stopped. "Easy," he muttered, raising his hand slightly. "We're not here for you." Ethan's eyes didn't leave him. "Then why are you here?" A brief pause. "For what's buried here," the man said. Ethan's expression didn't change. "Then you already know enough to leave." The first man smirked faintly. "You don't even know what you're sitting on." Ethan held his ground. "Doesn't matter." "It will," the second man said. "Soon." A beat. The wind howled outside, rattling the broken windows. The house creaked, like it was listening again. The first man lowered his hand slightly. "We're leaving," he said. "For now." Ethan didn't move, didn't relax. Good. The men backed toward the door slowly, never turning their backs fully. Shadow tracked every step, every shift, every breath. The front door opened. Cold air rushed in again. Then they were gone. The door swung shut behind them with a dull, echoing thud. Silence returned. Ethan stood there for a moment longer, then exhaled. "Yeah," he muttered. "That's not over." Shadow let out a short breath, the tension easing just slightly, but not gone, not even close. Ethan turned toward the back hallway immediately. "Come on." They moved fast out the rear door, across the yard, into the shed. The broken planks still lay scattered across the floor, where they had left them. The hidden wall beneath was exposed, untouched for now. Ethan dropped to one knee, grabbing the plank he had used earlier. "No more waiting," he said. Shadow stood beside him, alert. Ethan drove the wood into the seam of the hidden wall. Once, twice. The surface cracked slightly. A dull sound echoed behind it, hollow. He struck it again, harder. The stone shifted. A small section broke loose, falling inward with a sharp crack. Dust burst into the air, and Ethan coughed once, waving it aside, then leaned in. The opening was small but enough. He shined the flashlight inside, dark, but not empty. There was space beyond, a hidden room, sealed. Ethan widened the opening, pulling away more of the broken material. The gap grew larger, enough to see through, enough to enter. Shadow stepped forward suddenly, his body stiffening. Then he barked. Loud, sharp. Not warning. Alarm. Ethan turned instinctively. Too late. A figure lunged from the side of the shed. Fast. Unexpected. The second man. He had circled back. Ethan barely had time to react before the man grabbed his arm, trying to pull him away from the opening. Shadow exploded forward. A blur of motion. He hit the man hard, knocking him sideways. The struggle was fast and chaotic. The man swung wildly, was trying to push the dog off. Shadow held on, focused, relentless. Ethan recovered instantly, grabbing the man's shoulder and pulling him back. "Get out," Ethan snapped. The man staggered, breaking free just enough to retreat. He didn't stay, didn't try again. He backed away quickly, eyes locked on Ethan and Shadow. "This isn't over," he said. Then he ran out of the shed across the yard. Gone. Ethan stood there breathing hard, adrenaline still sharp in his veins. Shadow stepped back slowly, but not untouched. Ethan's eyes dropped immediately. A thin line of red marked the dog's side. Not deep, but enough. Ethan's chest tightened. Hey, he said, kneeling quickly. "Let me see." Shadow didn't resist, didn't pull away. Just stood there steady. Ethan checked the wound carefully. "It's not bad," he murmured. "You're okay." But his voice had changed. Softer. He reached up, resting his forehead briefly against the dog's head. "You always do that," he whispered. "You always take it first." Shadow huffed quietly, as if it didn't matter. as if it never had. Ethan exhaled slowly, then looked back at the broken wall. The opening was there now, wide enough, ready. Whatever had been hidden behind it for years was finally within reach. Ethan stood up slowly. His expression hardened again. "All right," he said, no more waiting. Shadow stepped beside him, wounded but unshaken. Ethan raised the flashlight, and together they stepped closer to the hidden room. Whatever waited inside was about to be uncovered. Ethan stepped through the broken opening slowly, the beam of his flashlight cutting into the darkness ahead, but the air inside was colder. Not just cool from being sealed, but still stagnant, like it hadn't been disturbed in years. Dust drifted in the narrow beam of light, floating like suspended time. Shadow followed close behind, though his movements were more careful now. His injured side didn't slow him much, but Ethan noticed the slight hesitation in his step. "Easy," Ethan whispered. Shadow gave a quiet breath and continued forward. The space opened wider than Ethan expected. Not just a crawl space, a room, hidden deliberately. Stone walls surrounded them, smoother than the rest of the mansion. The floor was solid, reinforced. This had been built with purpose, not rushed, not temporary. Ethan turned slowly, scanning everything. No furniture, no decorations, just storage. Crates lined one wall, metal boxes stacked neatly, and at the far end, something larger, something deliberate. Ethan moved toward it. Each step echoed softly, the sound dull against the enclosed space. The closer he got, the clearer it became. A large industrial safe, embedded into the wall itself. Not something you moved, something you built around. Shadow stopped a few feet away, watching. Ethan crouched in front of it, ran his hand across the cold metal surface. "No way," he murmured. This wasn't just hiding something. This was protecting something. He examined the lock. Old, but not simple. A mechanical combination. No electronic systems. No easy access. Ethan leaned back slightly, thinking. "Of course," he said under his breath. Vieri wouldn't trust anything that could be traced. He looked around the room again. The crates. The boxes. He opened one. Inside were documents, organized, carefully labeled. Ethan pulled out a file. Financial records. Numbers, transactions, large ones. He flipped through quickly, then stopped. His expression shifted. "This isn't just money," he said quietly. Shadow watched him. Ethan grabbed another file. More records, different accounts, different names, but all connected, structured, planned. He moved faster now, opening another crate. More documents, then a smaller box. Locked, but not as heavily. Ethan forced it open with a quick motion. Inside, photographs, maps, blueprints. He picked one up. A map of the surrounding region marked, specific locations circled, then another. Plans, buildings, structures. Not the mansion, something else. Ethan's breath slowed. This wasn't about hiding money, he said. It was about building something. Shadow shifted slightly, sensing the change in him. Ethan turned back toward the safe. The answer was in there. He knew it. Everything pointed to it. He looked around the room again, then back at the desk-like surface near the crates. Something caught his eye. A small metal plate, mounted into the wall. Numbers scratched faintly beside it, old but intentional. Ethan stepped closer, ran his fingers across the markings. 3 sets faded, but readable. "Not random," he said. Shadow watched. Ethan returned to the safe. Slowly, deliberately. He placed his hand on the dial, turned it. The metal clicked softly. He followed the numbers carefully, each movement precise, each turn measured. The final number settled into place. Ethan paused. His hand hovered over the handle. Then he pulled. The safe didn't open at first. Then a heavy, deep sound echoed through the room. The lock released. Ethan stepped back slightly. The door creaked open slow, revealing the darkness inside. He raised the flashlight. The beam cut through and then he saw it. Neatly arranged stacks. Rows upon rows of bundled cash. preserved and untouched. Ethan didn't speak, didn't move for a long moment. He just stared. Shadow stepped closer, quiet, steady, as if he already understood what it meant. Ethan exhaled slowly. 50 million, he murmured. But even as he said it, something didn't feel right. He reached inside, carefully, moved one stack aside. Behind it, more documents, different from the others, thicker, sealed. Ethan pulled one out, opened it. His eyes moved quickly across the page, but then slowed, then stopped. His expression changed completely. "This isn't his money," he said. Shadow tilted his head slightly. Ethan flipped to the next page, then another. Records, trust accounts, allocations, plans. He swallowed hard. "This was supposed to go somewhere," he said quietly, "not stay here." He looked deeper into the safe. More files all pointing to the same thing. A foundation. A project. Unfinished. Ethan's grip tightened on the paper. "This wasn't a stash," he said. "It was a plan." Shadow stood beside him, silent. Ethan leaned back slightly, the weight of the realization settling in. Everything the town had said, everything they believed. It wasn't wrong, but it wasn't complete. Vieri hadn't just hidden money. He had been trying to change something, fix something, but before he ran out of time, Ethan closed the file slowly. The room felt different now. Not just hidden, not just secret, purposeful. The wind outside howled faintly, distant but present. Ethan looked at the safe again, then at Shadow. "This changes everything," he said. Shadow didn't respond, didn't need to. Ethan stood there for a long moment between what was and what could be, the past and something unfinished, something waiting. Then a sound outside, faint but unmistakable. An engine returning. Ethan's head snapped up. Shadow turned instantly. The moment shattered. Reality rushed back in. "They're coming back," Ethan said. This time, not searching, not guessing. Now they knew. Ethan looked at the safe one last time, then grabbed the most important files. Fast, decisive. "We're not done," he said. "But we're not losing this." Shadow stepped closer. "Ready, always ready." Ethan turned toward the exit, the hidden room behind them, the truth in his hands, and danger closing in again, faster than before. Ethan moved quickly through the narrow opening. The files pressed tightly under his arm. Dust clung to his jacket as he stepped back into the shed. The dim light of late afternoon spilling in through the broken boards. Shadow followed immediately, his breathing steady but heavier now. The engine outside was louder this time. Closer. No hesitation. "They know," Ethan said under his breath. He scanned the yard. "Nothing yet, but not for long." "Truck," he said. Now they crossed the yard at a fast pace, boots crunching against gravel and dry grass. Ethan didn't run. Running made noise, which made mistakes, but every step carried urgency. Shadow stayed tight at his side. The engine roared somewhere beyond the trees. Another vehicle, maybe two. Ethan reached the truck and opened the door, tossing the files onto the passenger seat. "Stay," he said. Shadow hesitated for half a second, then jumped in. Ethan closed the door, then paused. His hand rested on the metal frame. His eyes shifted back toward the mansion, the broken windows, the open gate, the place that had already changed something inside him. The wind moved through the trees, low and steady. And beneath it, another sound, tires, coming up the road. He could leave, drive down the mountain, disappear, take the files, take the money, walk away. No one would blame him. No one would know. Ethan's grip tightened. His breathing slowed as a flash. Sand, smoke, a man shouting, then silence. He closed his eyes for a brief second, then opened them again. "No," he said quietly. Shadow looked at him from inside the truck. Ethan shook his head. "We're not running." He grabbed the files again, then shut the truck door. The engine sound grew louder. Ethan moved back toward the house. Shadow jumped down and followed without hesitation. "Stay close," Ethan said. They reached the front of the mansion just as the first vehicle appeared through the trees. Black, the same as before. It didn't slow down. It drove straight through the open gate. Then another followed behind it. Ethan stopped near the front steps. Didn't hide. Didn't move. He stood there waiting. The vehicles came to a stop. Engines idling. Doors opened. 3 men stepped out this time, different from the 2 before, better prepared, more confident. One of them looked at Ethan and smiled faintly. "You should have left," he said. Ethan didn't respond. Shadow stepped slightly forward, his body low, his eyes locked. The man glanced at the dog. "Still got that one," he said. "Loyal." Ethan's voice came low and steady. "This ends here." The man tilted his head slightly. "No," he said. "It doesn't." He took a step forward. Ethan didn't move. The wind picked up again, pushing through the trees, carrying dust and dry leaves across the yard. For a moment, everything felt still, balanced. Then, it broke. One of the men moved toward the side of the house. Another circled slightly, spreading out. Ethan's eyes tracked them. Calculating timing, Shadow growled louder now. Ethan placed a hand lightly on his back. "Not yet," he murmured. The first man stopped a few feet away. "You don't understand what you found," he said. Ethan met his gaze. "I understand enough." "Then, you know, it doesn't belong to you." Ethan's expression didn't change. "Neither does it belong to you." A flicker of irritation crossed the man's face. "Walk away," he said. "Take your dog. Forget this place." Ethan shook his head slowly. "Not happening." The man sighed. "Last chance." Ethan's grip tightened slightly on the files. "These don't stay buried," he said. The wind howled louder. Shadow stepped forward, placing himself between Ethan and the men. Even injured, even tired, he stood, unwavering. The second man moved suddenly, fast. Too fast. Shadow reacted instantly. He lunged, a blur of motion, intercepting. The man stumbled back or thrown off balance. The third man hesitated. Ethan moved at the same time, stepping forward, placing himself directly in the path. "Enough," he said. His voice cut through the noise, not loud, but final. The moment stretched, tense, unstable. Then the first man raised a hand slightly, the others stopped. He studied Ethan for a long second, then exhaled. "You're making a mistake," he said. Ethan didn't respond. The man looked at the files, then back at Ethan. "This isn't over," he said quietly. Ethan's eyes didn't leave him. "I know." The man nodded once, then turned. The others followed. They moved back toward the vehicles. No rush, no panic, just unfinished business. Engines started again. The black SUVs pulled away slowly back down the mountain. Gone. Ethan stood there long after the sound faded and the wind settled. The silence returned. But something had changed. Shadow stepped back beside him. Ethan looked down, the dog's side still marked, but his stance strong, unbroken. Ethan exhaled slowly, then looked at the files in his hand. The truth. The plan. The choice. He turned toward the mansion, toward the place that had once been feared, then toward the mountains beyond. "This doesn't end with us walking away," he said quietly. Shadow watched him. Ethan nodded slightly. "We finish it." The sun dipped lower behind the peaks, casting long shadows across the land. The mansion stood behind them, no longer just a place of secrets, now a decision. And for the first time since he arrived, Ethan knew exactly what he was going to do. The sun dipped behind the mountains, leaving the valley in a soft, fading glow. But the mansion stood quiet again, its broken windows catching the last light like fading memories. Ethan didn't move right away. He stood there with Shadow beside him, the file still in his hand, the weight of everything settling into place. Not confusion, not fear, clarity. He turned and walked back inside. The front door creaked as it opened, the familiar hollow echo greeting them again. But it didn't feel the same anymore. The house no longer felt like it was watching. It felt like it was waiting. Ethan moved through the hall slowly, his eyes scanning the space, not as a threat, but as something unfinished. "All right," he said quietly. "Let's see what you were trying to do." Shadow followed closely, his steps softer now, but steady. Ethan returned to the room upstairs, the desk, the shelves, the journal. But he set the files down carefully and began laying everything out piece by piece. The financial records, the maps, the letters, the journal entries. It took time. He didn't rush. Outside, the light faded completely, replaced by the quiet darkness of the mountains. Inside, Ethan worked. The flashlight sat on the desk, its beam steady, cutting through the dim room. Shadow lay nearby, watching, guarding, present. Ethan flipped through the documents again, slower now, connecting them, understanding them. The numbers weren't random. The accounts weren't hidden for greed. They were structured, directed, allocated. He found the key file, the one that tied everything together. A trust established years ago, untouched, waiting. Ethan leaned back slightly, reading the final lines again. "To fund a safe place for those who have nowhere left to go." He exhaled slowly. "A shelter," he said. Shadow lifted his head slightly. Ethan nodded. "For kids, families, people who need a place to start over." He looked around the room, then beyond it, to the mansion itself. "This was never meant to stay empty," he said quietly. The house creaked softly in response, the sound no longer unsettling, just present. Ethan gathered the papers again, stacked them, organized. Then he stood. "Come on," he said. They moved back downstairs. The hall stretched before them, still worn, still damaged, but no longer lifeless. Ethan walked through each room, slowly. The broken furniture, the dust-covered floors, the cracked walls. He saw it differently now, not as decay, but as potential. Ethan stepped into the main hall again and stopped. "This place," he murmured. Shadow stood beside him. "It doesn't have to stay like this." The wind outside had calmed. The silence inside felt different. Not heavy, not watching, just quiet. Ethan moved toward the front door and stepped outside. The mountains stretched wide and still under the night sky. The stars had begun to appear, scattered across the darkness. He stood there for a long moment, then reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone. The signal was weak, barely there, but enough. He scrolled through his contacts, paused, then selected one. The call rang, once, twice, then. "Cole," a voice answered. Ethan didn't smile, but his expression softened. "Yeah," he said, "it's me." A pause. "Oh, I didn't think I'd hear from you again." Ethan looked out over the valley. "Yeah," he said quietly, "I didn't either." Another pause. "What's going on?" Ethan took a breath. "I found something," he said, "and I need help finishing it." Silence on the other end. "Then you still in Colorado?" "Yeah, I'll be there." The call ended. Ethan lowered the phone slowly. Shadow stepped closer. Ethan looked down at him. "We're not doing this alone," he said. The dog huffed softly. Agreement. Over the next few days, things changed slowly but undeniably. The mansion didn't stay empty. People came. At first, just one, then another. Men and women who carried the same weight Ethan did, veterans. Some quiet, some broken, all searching for something. Ethan didn't explain everything. He didn't need to. They saw it or felt it, understood. Work began. Clearing debris, fixing walls, restoring what had been left behind. It wasn't fast, it wasn't easy, but it was real. Shadow moved through it all, watching, guarding, present in every step. His wound healed slowly, but his strength never faded. The house changed day by day, room by room. The silence lifted, replaced by voices, movement, life. Weeks passed, then months. And one morning, Ethan stood at the front of the mansion again. But this time it looked different. The windows were repaired, the walls cleaned, the grounds cleared. It wasn't perfect, but it wasn't broken anymore. A van pulled up in the distance. Ethan watched as it came to a stop. The door opened. A woman stepped out. Then two children, small, quiet, uncertain. Ethan walked forward slowly, Shadow beside him. The woman looked at him, hesitant. "This is the place?" she asked. Ethan nodded. Yeah, he said. She glanced back at the house, then at her children. They said it was safe. Ethan looked at them, then at the mansion, then back at her. It is, he said. The children stepped forward slowly. Shadow moved closer, but gentle, careful. One of the kids reached out, hesitated, then placed a small hand on his fur. Shadow didn't move, didn't flinch, just stayed. The child smiled. Small, but real. Ethan watched it and something inside him shifted. Not pain, not weight, something lighter, something new. The house stood behind them, no longer feared, no longer empty. Now it was something else, something alive, something that mattered. Ethan looked at Shadow, then back at the house. We stayed, he said quietly, and for the first time, it felt like the right decision. Years passed quietly in Black Ridge Valley. The road that once felt like a scar through the mountains now carried something different, not fear, not whispers, but purpose. The mansion stood where it always had, but it no longer looked like something abandoned. Lights glowed warmly through restored windows. The iron gate had been repaired, standing straight again, open during the day, welcoming. The name people once avoided had changed. Now they simply called it the house. And for many, it became something more, home. Ethan stood on the front porch, leaning lightly against the wooden railing. The evening air was cool, carrying the scent of pine and distant earth after rain. Below him, in the yard, children laughed. Simple, unforced, almost unreal. A few adults stood nearby, talking quietly, watching over them. Some carried the same distant look Ethan once had. Some still did. But not all the time anymore. That was the difference. Ethan's eyes moved slowly across the scene, every piece of it, the repaired walls, the cleared land, the life that had taken root where silence once lived. He let out a slow breath. You were right, he murmured. Shadow lay beside him, older now. His once dark coat had begun to gray along the edges, especially around his face. His movements were slower, more deliberate, but his eyes remained the same, sharp, steady, loyal, always watching. Ethan reached down, resting his hand gently on the dog's side. The scar was still there, a thin line beneath the fur. A reminder of what had been risked, of what had been protected. While Shadow didn't move, didn't need to. He just stayed the same way he always had. One of the children ran up toward the porch. Mr. Cole, the boy called. You coming down? Ethan looked at him, then smiled slightly. Give me a minute, he said. The boy nodded and ran back toward the others. Ethan watched him go, then looked back at the mountains. The sun was setting again, just like that first night. But everything felt different. There was no weight pressing down, no tension in the air, no sense of something watching from the dark. The house no longer held secrets. It held people, stories, second chances. Ethan leaned back slightly. You remember that first night? He asked quietly. Shadow's ears flicked. Ethan let out a faint breath. I thought this place was like me, he said. Broken, empty. He paused, then shook his head slightly. Turns out it was just waiting. Shadow shifted slightly, adjusting his position. Ethan looked down at him. You knew that before I did, he said. The dog's eyes met his, calm, certain, as if the answer had always been simple. Ethan chuckled softly under his breath. Yeah, he said. You always do. The wind moved gently through the trees, soft and steady. Somewhere in the distance, a door closed. Voices carried lightly through the evening air. Normal sounds. Living sounds. Ethan straightened slightly. All right, he said. Let's not keep them waiting. He stepped off the porch. Shadow followed, slower now, but still beside him, always beside him. They walked into the yard together. The children ran past them, laughter echoing. One of them stopped again, reaching down to pet Shadow. Hey, old man, the kid said with a grin. Shadow didn't react, just stood there, patient, steady, the same way he had always stood, between danger and everything that mattered. Ethan watched it and felt something settle fully inside him. Not a memory, not a weight, a truth. Simple, clear. They had stayed, they had faced it, they had finished what someone else couldn't. And in doing that, They had changed everything. Night settled slowly over the valley. Lights turned on inside the mansion, warm, inviting, alive. Ethan stood near the center of it all, watching the people around him. Then he looked down at Shadow. The dog lowered himself gently onto the ground, resting near the entrance, his usual place, watching, guarding, even now. Ethan stepped closer and sat beside him. For a long moment, they just stayed there together, the noise of the house behind them, the quiet of the mountains ahead. Balanced, complete. Ethan reached out, resting his hand on Shadow's neck one more time. "We stayed," he said softly. The dog's breathing was slow, steady, peaceful. Ethan looked out toward the horizon, the same place that once felt empty, now filled with something he hadn't thought he'd find again. A purpose, a home, a future. And as the night settled fully around them, the mansion stood bright against the dark. No longer a place people feared, but a place people found. And at its door, a man who had once been lost, and a dog who never left, still standing, still watching, still home. If this story meant something to you, I want to hear from you. Or just comment 1 if you believe loyalty like Shadows still exists in this world. Or comment 0 if you think stories like this are too rare today. And if you've ever felt lost or found your way back like Ethan did, tell me where you're watching from. I read every comment. Don't forget to subscribe because the next story might hit even closer to home. There's always another story waiting, and I'll see you in the next one.